Hi everyone, Alisdair Hogarth here. A couple of weeks ago I had the privilege of sitting down with my two piano teachers, John Blakely and Fowke, to talk about their teacher, Gordon Green, who was an absolutely legendary teacher who taught at the Royal Academy of Music and also in the north of England. He taught many of today's most prolific pianists and he was a real musical force. But there's not much information about him online, and if you do a Google search, hardly anything comes up. So I wanted to investigate a little bit more about what made him so special as a teacher. I really hope you enjoy this video. Was there a sort of buzz around Gordon as a teacher, and did you ask for him, or were you sort of allocated and it was just lucky that he was so fantastic?
Certainly in my case I was just allocated, and I remember Barbara Sidwell, when I told her, she said, "Oh, I don't think I know him," or something to that effect. But, you know, as soon as I began to tell her how it was, she was overjoyed, actually. So no, I was just allocated. I don't think he was ever the kind of, this is the extraordinary thing, I think. I don't feel he was ever the kind of teacher who had a kind of big following when everybody was queuing up saying, "I must go to Gordon."
No,
because he was so self-effacing. I mean, that so wasn't his style.
Yes, exactly. He wasn't a sort of cult teacher.
No, absolutely.
And the other thing, John, I think we must bear in mind is that he wasn't one of the sort of academy, the old guard, because he was based in Manchester.
Yes, absolutely.
He'd only moderately recently, I think Tommy Armstrong, the then principal, had asked Gordon to come down and teach a couple of days a week. But I was allocated him because when I was at boarding school, downside school in Somerset, Freddie Grinke and Geoffrey Pratley came down to do a duo recital, a violin and piano. And I was introduced to them as this boy in the school and played to them, and they said, "Oh yes, now this young fellow must come to the Royal Academy and he must study with Gordon Green."
Oh, lovely.
So it was on their recommendation that
I didn't know that.
they suggested. So that's how that came. But you're so right, John. He was not. I wanted, because there were some big names in those days, you know, and trying, you know, people like Guy Johnson and Freddie Jackson and you probably remember a few others. Leslie England was another one. Max Pirani.
Pirani, yes.
And they were the sort of big academy names who'd been there themselves, probably students.
Yes.
But Gordon wasn't. He was always not quite out of it. I mean, people loved him. He was, so
he was kind of. He was just different.
He was different.
Somehow.
But you're so right about the fact that he had a huge personality. He filled a room, but he was so self-effacing and modest. He was a sort of dichotomy.
That's the extraordinary thing, actually. This huge character, and yet everything was done for the students and for the music.
Yes.
You know.
Absolutely. I can remember even later on when some years later on, Martina Torino was giving a recital at the festival hall, and this is quite a bit later, long after they dated about 1979 or thereabouts. And I remember him walking along the Hungerford Bridge, and he'd been diagnosed with cancer then, I remember that. And he had a big heavy coat on, and he was determined to go there, and I saw this figure and just bumped into him. So, you know, what John was saying, his dedication to his students was total.
And he also had no interest in being a big name teacher. And I remember him telling me, probably quite late on, I think, that, and not surprisingly, on many occasions he'd been asked to be on some international jury. And he always refused. He said, "I'm only interested in that kind of thing if there's an educational element to it." I just remember that.
I don't remember that.
And he just wasn't interested. Well, actually, he despised competitions.
He did.
For all sorts of reasons.
He was quite passionate about that.
Yeah.
But it was like I was saying to you earlier, John, you know, he was only concerned in, you know, your individual development in your own time, in your own way. And as I think I mentioned, you know, if you hadn't played or what you felt you hadn't played, which is probably the case, particularly well, or done yourself justice in any occasion, and he sensed that you were crestfallen, as one inevitably was. He would say, dear boy, or dear girl, but dear boy, I'm not concerned how you play today. I'm not concerned how you play today, but I am concerned how you play in 10 years' time. In other words, it was just part of a process, part of an evolution, which is unbelievably rare because people want instant results today.
And he would let, certainly me and perhaps all of us, play kind of unwisely in some area of piano playing.
Yes.
Because he was, well, for two reasons. I think one, because we had to find out for ourselves, and in my case it was mostly I was playing too slow and too quietly. And he allowed me to take about 9 years to discover that wasn't a brilliant idea. Yeah,
and he also used to say things, John, if one had, of course I did like loud, crashy pieces, he would say sometimes, well, no louder, dear boy.
Yes.
In other words, not shut up, don't make a filthy racket, but no louder, dear boy. In other words, he let you, just as we've just said, he let you go beyond the bounds, because I remember him saying, somebody it's no good telling somebody, quieter than, it was cosmetic teaching, anybody, a lot of people do that. He felt that if you were talented, it was just a light hand on the controls.
Yes.
And the talented person will understand that they will find their own way. Just a little warning, no louder.
Yeah.
And then it made you alert. You think, gosh, I was making a bit of a filthy
You didn't need to say much. That was the extraordinary thing. I love teaching, but I'm so aware that I talk too much. And he actually didn't say a huge amount. A very early memory was when I was doing my LRAM, which I suppose was the biggest thing I'd done up to then. And I'm surprised to be remembering that you had to do scales. Anyway, he was testing me on some scales. And obviously I'd thought, John Blakely, I don't need to practice scales, I'm well beyond that. So I hadn't really looked at them. And needless to say, they're pretty awful. And he said, John, those really aren't very good. And to this day, I can remember the humiliation. Not that he wanted to humiliate me, but just I had not given him what he deserved.
Yes,
that was the thing. Just not very good. Yeah. I never worked so hard.
Since
that. Yes.
We've become a scale specialist.
Practice. Well, sadly not. But, the other thing about competitions, I've just remembered. One reason he used to hate them, he used to say, the trouble with competitions is because they happen over a number of rounds, he said, they favour, and I think this is pretty much his words, he said, they favour those who play well always, but wonderfully never.
Yes.
You can imagine.
And I can remember exactly a version of that when he used to say to us, the hallmark of a great artist is someone who plays superlatively well occasionally.
Yes.
And that occasion, it allows for vulnerability. And of course, and I often say to my students, I'm sure people like Corto, for example, Paris, he wouldn't got through the first round of Leeds, chucked out all his fumbles and forgets, Pelmeter, wouldn't have got anywhere in all these things. And I think the vulnerability is something, he was interested in the individual person, not in the streamlined thing.
And he would have hated, I think, what inevitably sort of music education has become. I mean, teaching at college or wherever it may be, I worry that every time the students perform within college, they're being given a mark for it. And I think it's unhealthy.
I think that's unhealthy.
And Gordon used to say, he said this wonderful thing to me once, he said, the time when you're at a music conservatoire should be the time when it's safe to fail. I've never forgotten that. But that isn't how it is now, and it's a great regret. But fancy having the courage to let your student do some stupid thing.
Yes.
Because you're because he's working on something else, or he's waiting for me to
Yes.
discover that it's very stupid to play so quietly they can't hear it in the front row.
He also used to say about teaching, he used to talk about the aim of a teacher, what the aim of a teacher, and he used to say of himself, the aim of a teacher is to make themselves redundant. I always remember him saying that.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the measure of the humility of the man.
Yes.
He wanted just to let you go and do your own thing. That's extraordinarily rare. You said a moment ago about this business that you feel you talk too much. But I actually do happen to think that there are people who teach too much. You know, they're too fiddly and too pernickety.
Yes.
You know, do this and
Yeah,
relax that, all this stuff, which I think
It's
causes
very
more problems.
tempting.
Well,
Gordon never talked about
No,
that stuff.
never.
That's the funny thing.
Yes,
he didn't really talk about technique.
people have often asked me, you know, what sort of technical thing. But in the early lessons, out came the Oscar Behringer. Of course, I
Yes.
loved technical
Yes,
exercises. In fact, over the years, I think I like technical exercises more than music, really. But I was doing Josephi when I was a teenager and just loved it, and I'm addicted to it, really, in many ways. But he introduced me, and I think also probably us, all of us, to Oscar Behringer.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
And I can remember the early lessons when he suggested doing them in different ways, not just as written, which of course is...
Different triplet groupings,
triplet groups,
so that
yes,
each
yes.
of the two fingers would get
Well,
a
yeah,
go,
all that kind of stuff, or holding notes down in
Yes,
particular, and all of that.
Yeah, I can remember a very early lesson. I came armed with my new copy of Behringer, and he wrote in the front, on the front inside page, he wrote out his fingering for chromatic minor thirds. You know, the sliding on
sliding,
the sliding E
yes,
flat
which
to
I
E
use
natural
this
and
day.
so on.
It's very good. And it's amazing how few people know
Yeah,
about it.
absolutely. It's wonderful fingering.
Yeah.
It's very good exercise too. I've still
So
got
how
that.
do you do it? You slip the second from the E flat to the
Second
E.
E flat, the E, and
flat, and
F
then
sharp to G. No, F sharp to
B flat to B natural.
Yes.
And then on the way down, it's the last, so it's always the last black note depending which way you're travelling. So on the way down, it's F sharp to F, and then C sharp to C.
Well, I've forgotten that bit.
Yeah.
But he was...
Yes, I remember him writing carefully.
He was very... I can remember his hands. He had rather lovely hands, quite very sort of practical, quite athletic looking hands.
Yeah.
But he didn't demonstrate very much, did he?
I remember him sitting there and playing a Chopin waltz to the class once.
Well, I remember him playing the Chopin Third Ballad on the 70.
I remember that. And some absolutely extraordinary things he did with the rhythm and the pedalling. You know.
What, in the ballad? You remember the ballad?
No, I was thinking
no,
whichever Chopin waltz it
right.
was. Just like, gosh, I want to do that. You know. But it was very rare because, I mean, he was self-effacing, but I think there was a better reason that he didn't really play very much. He was absolutely insistent in a lesson, or if we were practicing at home, that before we had another go, we thought out silently how it should be.
Yes.
And I often remember I would be about to play again, he'd say, John, just
Yes.
now, let's try it.
Yes.
You know, and we'd think it through.
Yes, so and he used to, gosh, you've triggered a memory. I can remember saying, it's as absurd sitting down and doing it again, in the instance you just quoted, described, as for somebody to put a blank sheet of paper into a typewriter
I don't know.
and just clatter at any key and expect a poem
Yes.
to come out, a beautifully crafted
Monkeys
poem.
producing Shakespeare.
Yes. And I use that analogy quite a lot. You think before you play it. It sounds so eminently obvious, and yet one doesn't come across that often. Because the anxiety, we all want to make a
very
noise
difficult to
immediately.
do.
So was the idea to actually sing it through in your head?
Yes,
To hear it,
yeah.
yes.
Sing through
To
the entire
imagine,
phrase.
Yes.
either imagine some aspect of timing
Yeah.
or voicing,
Yes.
which is a word he never used actually, as far as I remember. But
He
just
used to
the
talk about
sound
the top.
quality,
I think.
top.
Yes,
Yes,
it was top. Top is always a thing.
Fifth finger, yes.
And fascination. You said you
Yes.
another, but that's the word he used.
Yeah.
Fascination.
Yes.
Tonal fascination. But as a general rule, he didn't talk about technique.
Very little, really.
It depends what you mean by technique. Because people, I suppose, would mean the athleticism.
Yeah.
But he talked more about really the sort of technique of pedaling and technique of how to make sound.
Yes.
That was his chief
Yeah.
preoccupation, I would say.
Do you remember that fun? Were you there in the class? And he went into kind of quite extended sort of fantasy picture, and he was illustrating the idea that particularly to play a quiet chord, you need firm enough fingers.
Oh yes, called fingers of steel.
Yeah, yes. Because he used to say, unless your fingers are firm enough, the key will push your fingers up. And he used to think that was terribly funny.
Yes,
it's actually very good physics.
It's very true. And I also think that.
But he painted this fantastic picture. He said, I'm imagining a block of concrete.
A block of concrete. Yes, I remember being lowered.
Yes, and
he'd obviously
got some machinery in his mind.
Yes.
You know,
And coming down,
scarfing, and it would come down
just
and down
onto
and
the
down.
keyboard.
And it would touch the black keys first, and he said it would make the most beautiful pianissimo that you've ever heard. And then you would hear another one as it touched the white keys.
And then a sort of
and
cracking.
after that there'd be the cracking of wood and breaking of metal.
And the bursting
piano
of
was smashed to pieces. I always remember
I remember that so well.
Absolutely.
Yes, and he also used to say, you know, dear boy, in order to make the most beautiful sounds, you often have to do the most ugly practice.
Yes.
Which is the same kind of thing, you know, really.
Well, he used to say the best practice is the practice that sounds least like the piece.
That's
Brilliant.
well, John Tchaikovsky, whom I got to know many years later, said the same thing. I remember him saying to me, "Have you ever heard me practice?" Because I haven't. No, sure, I've never heard you practice. If you heard me practice, you wouldn't think I could play the piano. And do you remember Gordon telling us that story? Because he lived at 33 Hicks.
Oh, yeah, this is the Richter story.
This is the Richter story.
Yes.
And Richter, the Philharmonic Hall just down the road, and Richter was rehearsing for the concert. You might want to take this. And the piano was in the room, and the phone rang. Of course, in those days, phones were in the corridor.
And it was a Sunday.
And it was a Sunday. And then you can take the story from there, John.
Well, the phone rang, and Richter was practicing. Was it Bartok 2, I think? As I recall, I could be wrong about that. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so the phone rang, and Gordon was downstairs and answered it. But obviously, the person who'd rung could hear this, so Gordon went upstairs, leaving the phone off the hook, so that he could speak more easily. And it turned out to be a colleague of Gordon's from Royal Northern.
I hadn't realised this.
And Richter could be heard in the background practicing away, and the colleague said to Gordon, "Oh, poor Gordon, teaching on a Sunday, and what a terrible pupil." And he used to tell that story to illustrate the fact that practice should sound terrible.
Yes, exactly. Well, I do like to say to my students, if I recognise the piece you're practicing when I pass a room, you're not practicing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think we probably got that from Gordon.
Yeah, very much so.
So
on a similar theme, I can remember him on many occasions, if we were working on kind of uniting a certain section with another section of a sonata movement or something, make sure it hung together, he'd say, we have to stage manage it, he used to say. Which was a wonderful thought.
Yes.
Just kind of think out how you're going to organise it and make it work.
Yeah.
You know.
It is so
stage
true.
manager.
You have to have strategies, and think it through. He was very good at that.
It's strategies.
Well, I can't remember using that word, but yes, there is the importance of having things worked out.
You mentioned about starting points. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, he was very good on memory, because memory was, I've always said, well, we all have to work hard at memory. But he, I would guess that Gordon did too. He was very modest about his playing. But it was a very simple device, really. And that is just always to have starting places, simply that. Places to practice from and to play to, as it were. And
you tick them off as you go right.
If you really do know those starting places, especially in the part fugue, for example, you know, the chances are that it'll give you some feeling of security.
Yeah, you used to say having them makes it much less likely that you'll need them.
Yes. I haven't found that to be true. unfortunately.
The other thing he always used to say, there was a wonderful twinkle in his eye, he used to say, always jump forwards. Never go back.
Yes, no, one doesn't want to visit the scene of disaster a second time round. I do agree with that. But
actually, that reminds me of a thing he used to say, just in terms of expressiveness and so on. Having worked out some place where you would stage manage it and make something work in a particular way, he used to say, never revisit the scene of the crime. Do you remember that? So don't do it again. Do something different the next time it comes round.
Yes.
Never revisit the scene of the crime.
He used to say he started learning the piano. He started with Frank Merritt, didn't he? Talk about Frank.
Yeah.
But he said he didn't really seriously start studying the piano till he was 19. I always remember that. And he didn't pull any punches like so many people do on the sort of phantom careers that they've aspired to have had. And they hope to sort of dupe their students and they had huge careers, which they probably had. But Gordon was quite modest about his career. He said he did play on Polish radio, for example, didn't he? I seem to remember him saying. And he played during the war in Liverpool.
Certainly, yes.
He was a conscientious objector, do you remember that?
Yes.
He worked on a farm, and I remember him. He used to talk about, didn't he give the first performance of one of the Rolls Thorne piano concertos?
I think it was Rolls Thorne, yes.
And
they were good pals.
They were good pals. But he told a story, I think it might have been even the Philharmonic Hall, where, during the war possibly, he was expecting to play one concerto.
Oh, yes.
And the orchestra started playing another.
It was, I can tell you which ones
you
it
remember
was. He was booked to play List 1 and the List Totentanz. And the Totentanz starts just with a drum roll into floods of octaves.
Yes.
But that was in the second half. And he came on for the first half to play List 1. And he heard... and he said, I was in bar 4 of the Totentanz before I realised what had happened. But he would always use these stories to illustrate something, and that was illustrating the fact that too much thought can actually get in the way.
Yes.
And you can.
Yes. Exactly, yes.
So he played 4 bars of Floods of Octaves, isn't it? I've never played the piece, but
yes, I have. Can't remember how it starts now. Actually.
But he was in it and doing something, very athletic and difficult, completely on autopilot until about bar 4, and then he said, then you feel very nervous when you realise which piece you're in.
That's a pretty horrific story.
Can you imagine? Yeah.
But did he encourage a kind of sense of performance in which you were almost listening to your own playing as if it was an external source, as if it was just kind of coming out and you're monitoring it, and so you're not actually, almost like you're not actually playing.
What, the remote control thing?
Yeah.
I think he would have said that that's half the story.
Yes, exactly. It's not the whole. I think he was.
But it is half the story.
It is half the story. But it's amazing how you can give performances. I think this is what he was saying, and it's certainly borne out of my experience. I'm sure yours, John, that one's played, and every note has been a self-conscious torture. Every note has been wrung out of you, and it's just been, a real effort to come off afterwards. And the door bursts open the green room. Philip, you were on tremendous form tonight. What happened? And you think, well, that was... and converse, you think, well,
that was great.
I did. That was okay. I feel, and you just sense,
people come up and say,
no,
thank you.
Yes, well, that was memorable. An unforgettable performance.
Yes.
And all those sort of things.
Yes.
But
so I think he would say,
if it's good,
it's half
good.
the story,
Yes.
but that half must be there.
Yeah, because performances can be so many things, and can be good and bad for so many different reasons.
And the other half being the external tweaking and adjusting as you go.
Yeah. So there's the me feeling it all now and giving that to the audience, but there's also the me tweaking the knobs and
well, it can be the me
managing.
feeling nothing now, But you've so worked out a system by which it's all transmitted. You've done all the feeling before.
Yes.
And it goes out because you're twiddling all the knobs, you know what I've got to do, there's a bit of spot of light in there. And it sort of works because you've done the work beforehand. I knew a wonderful actress, a Dame Flora Robson. I got to know her very well in her retirement. She lived down in Bath, and she was one of the great stage and screen actresses of the last century. But I remember her saying to me, God, and she sort of adopted me for a period of time. It's lovely. I used to go and visit her, and she said just that when she'd done the work and the rehearsals, run-throughs, dress rehearsals, when she was a lady of great faith too. And backstage, she used to say, "Well, Lord, I've done my work. Now you do yours." And I think that's great, and that's exactly how it is. I think people might say it in different ways, but there's only so much you can do, and the rest, in a sense, is trust, faith, lottery. Yes. There's something unquantifiable. And Gordon would that is only half the story. The twiddling.
Did he ever encourage a sort of almost a commentary when you were playing? Was that ever part of it?
Well, in a way, the starting places thing is a commentary, because you're saying to yourself, I've just passed starting place number 3. You know. So there
4 more to go.
Yes.
That's the bit that worries me.
Yes.
Anyway, I always remember Gordon, and this is, we were saying earlier, how generous he was. And he came out to Gerrards Cross on a train to teach me before the recital diploma and that kind of thing. And I can remember him at my Wigmore Hall debut, no less. He met me for my run-through in the morning, and he took me out to a pub lunch in the Marylebone Lane. And I remember he said, have a beer. And I remember, God, I shouldn't bring in the before, but I remember I had half of lager. Anyway, the concert came, and it was all, a big event. And he came round in the interval, and he said, "Dear boy, it's wonderful. Don't try quite so hard." And what a kind thing to do. He didn't I need to say anything more. In other words, just me being me rather high. It's okay. He thinks it's okay. So don't try it. And what a lovely thing to say.
It reminds me that this was after the concert. Gosh, I still remember how nervous I was. I got signed up at the academy to play to the new students on their first day, and for some ridiculous reason, I was asked to play Opus 111. I mean, a bit tough for new students to sit through, and I was paralytically nervous.
The whole of it?
Yeah, paralytically nervous. Because I was sort of being, I've been slightly set up as, if you're not careful, you might be like this in a few years' time,
But you were a sort of specimen, weren't you?
Yeah, exactly, absolutely.
This is the product.
Yes. So I kind of got through it and felt I'd been really rather powerful, And Gordon came up afterwards and he said, "Very good, my dear, very good. Just a little exaggerated." Back to square
damning
one.
With fake praise, yes.
Exactly.
But he was very good at just the bon mot. But that's like the scales, very good.
Not very good.
I mean, scales have never been the same since.
Do you have any other sort of memorable quotes that you like to use in your own teaching?
Well, thinking of teaching, I mean, this is perhaps the most important thing I think he ever said to me, or the thing that made the deepest impression. Which in a way wasn't so much to do with how it helped me develop my own playing, but what it's meant to me as somebody trying to be a teacher more recently. And I don't know how I brought it up, because he never wanted to talk about himself, But I did manage to somehow ask the question, what are your feelings about teaching, or something vague like that? And I've never forgotten it, he said, "Well, my dear," he said, "some teachers, and there are many, say to the student, 'Come here, and I will tell you where to go. And I can remember him doing that. And he said, what I try to do is I go to where the student is and we go somewhere together. And the difference between me and the student is that I've got more experience.
Yes, that's very, very moving.
I've never forgotten it, and I try to think of it, maybe not consciously, every time I teach.
Do you know, I think that's...
If one could get near that.
That really resonates deeply.
Yeah.
The bit I've taken from that is going to a place together. I think we've inherited that. That is extraordinary.
Yeah. And that, if you have to analyse it, that I think is why all his students played differently from each other. There was no in-house style at all. I think we all
he did
differently.
If he had any pride, and he didn't really much, but he did set great store by that. I remember him saying that. And when I think of the people in the class, I mean, someone like Christian, for example, Martina, hugely different to you and me.
Could you mention some of the other pianists that studied with him, so we get an idea of
we've got Martino.
breadth?
Martino was...
This was in studying with him.
Yes, Martino just left.
Martino Thierry.
Well, Christian Blackshaw, who was a very different player to me anyway, and possibly to you as well, John. Very...
More accurate than me.
But very sort of, very stylish, very elegant, poised, finished. And then there was Tessa Ace. Oh, and Anne Shasby, who's playing. I always...
Yes.
Well, I loved all their playing, but Anne Shasby's playing always stood out for me. And she's after she left Gordon, she so hardly played the piano. So
really? Just very passionate playing, as I remember.
I remember it was really just very, very beautiful. She played the Carmen Fantasy, which is why I learned that. Yeah. And then there was Richard Buckman, and I always thought of him as a very sort of virtuosic player, as I recall. Martin Jones had just left.
Yes. So there was some...
Mary Howe. Oh, we've got Tessa.
Mary Howe,
and Tessa would learn voraciously. I remember she always came with something different every week, memorised and ready for performance.
Yes.
Was Martin Roscoe?
No, he was up in...
he was in Northern, wasn't
up in North,
But he was with Gordon, or was he not?
He was with Gordon.
I think so. I don't know for how long.
And would the same be Stephen Huff as well?
Stephen Huff was a boy.
Yes.
And I can remember
he was with Gordon when he was young. You know,
when he was a boy.
Yeah.
And somewhere I've seen a photograph of Gordon, perhaps Stephen has it, outside number 33, and a sort of 11-year-old Stephen, and standing, I think, next to Gordon outside number 33. Yeah.
What's number 33?
33 Hope Street, that's where Gordon lived.
In Liverpool?
Yeah.
In Liverpool.
I so remember, I went to, not frequently, but a few times before some big event.
Well, I think we both went quite a lot before the recital play, which we took on the same day.
Yeah.
We went up to Liverpool. Of course, this is... I mean, Liverpool was quite exciting.
Yes, it was.
Going up there.
But I remember it was either before I did my LRAM recital or before my first Wigmore, but I think it was when I was much younger. I recall it as the first time I'd been to 33 Hope Street, and I went up on the morning train. We worked in I had lunch at Dorothy's Club.
Yes, the 23 Club.
Yeah, which
Number
Dorothy, his
23,
wife, ran a kind of private members dinner club.
Yes, between the house and the Philharmonic Hall.
Yeah. Lunch there, worked in the afternoon, listened to lots of recordings, talked a lot, laughed, talked about art, played the piano a bit. Dinner at the club, worked in the evening a bit more, stayed the night, worked the next morning, lunch, and then I think I went home. And I said to Gordon, "It's been absolutely great, Gordon, what do I owe you?" And he said, "My dear boy, it's been a pleasure." And I thought, this is extraordinary.
Yes, we all had the same treatment.
It was a pleasure.
I mean, really, to be wined and dined, at this really rather special club.
Yeah, yeah.
And one bumped into really rather distinguished people.
I was far too naive then, I think, to realise quite how super.
I remember seeing Adrian Bolt there, who just done a concert, that sort of thing. But I think Rubinstein used to go down. I mean, it was a real sort of arts dining club, and
can't quite imagine it happening now, really.
no,
Sort of, it was of its time.
of its time. Yeah, and in fact, actually, in some ways, John,
before
it was even
it was
after
past
its time.
Yeah, exactly.
In a way, and the house itself. I mean, there we were in the I first went there in the 1960s, and of course Liverpool in the 1960s and the Beatles. And I remember watching the Catholic Cathedral was just going up. I think the wigwam, Paddy's wigwam. The Anglican Cathedral was still unfinished.
Yes.
And of course I was interested in them both in those days.
Yeah.
And there was quite a sort of buzz in Liverpool in those days.
What was his music room like?
It was rather dark. It was high
Yes,
ceiling.
it was dark.
Like this. It was rather like this room, but it was high ceiling. And but
Terrible
it was
piano.
two very, very poor pianos.
Yes.
A rather nasty Beckstein and a really very sour, unyielding Steinway.
Yeah.
I always remember him telling us the story of getting the Steinway. I think it was in an auction, and he couldn't go to the auction, and he said to Dorothy, you know, could you go to the auction for me, because I want to go somewhere down to London, whatever it may be. And he decided that he'd offer £200. And he said, as he was putting on his coat, leaving the door of number 33, he said to Dorothy, make that guineas. Which really dated.
Yes, yes.
I don't know why I remember that story, but it's just
funny.
like to make that guineas.
Yeah.
And they got the piano, but it wasn't a great piano. But he set great store in listening, didn't he? You mentioned that a moment ago, his record collection. And that there's a funny bit of wood at the record player.
Yes,
he was very careful about polishing the records. And he used to dust the pianos in the evening, do you remember, with that car duster with the hand. Close them up. And there was one window looking out into this rather narrow, dank-looking sort of lawn, and there was a funny sculpture at the bottom of the garden. And in a certain light, John, he used to love this, in the window, in the glass, in a certain light, you could see written, I think it was in an arch, chips and peas.
I've forgotten that.
Chips and peas. and he thought that was probably the window was blown out in the war and was replaced quickly. And the only bit of glass they could find was an ex-cafe sheet of glass, and they'd rubbed out taken out the paint, but you could just say chips and peas in a certain light.
Wonderful.
Do you remember anything about your very first lesson and what that entailed and what you played, what he said?
I can't remember what I think I played the first ballade, but the only thing I particularly remember, I must have been so stuck up really, thinking I was wonderful, and I remember feeling quite crestfallen, but not for long, because immediately one began to understand what he was going to be able to do. I remember him saying, John, be very careful not to bend your fourth finger back that way when you play, he said, because you don't get such good control, and if you play forte like that, you will strain it. And I remember just for a moment thinking, oh, come on, I thought I was better than that. And then that was wiped out by the fact that he's going to be able to teach me. That was I remember that was his first remotely critical thing he said. I think it was first ballade.
I can remember him talking about memory, which I used to find, well, have always found hard work. That always takes longer than anything else. Although once you've done it, it's sort of, but it's not a question of repetition for me, it's a question of endless. It's probably different for different people. But I hadn't found my way in at all, and I don't know that I ever did at the Academy, although Gordon helped me with starting places, but I found it immensely hard. And I can remember one really very devastating occasion, and it wasn't critical, but I think I stumbled through Schubert D major or something with masses of forgets and having to refer, just and very unsettling. And he just said, "Dear boy," something like, "You do seem to have trouble with your memory." I don't know why, it was like a lance in my heart.
Yes,
you know.
yes.
I couldn't honestly say, well, I hope you didn't notice, but of course you're just so glad. But I always remember thinking, you know, so it in a way, I won't say that didn't help me, but I always remember that. I always remember. The other thing I remember is that he gave me, as he gave you, I think, quite a range of stuff. Really, I remember the Schumann toccata. You always thought I was quite good at that sort of thing. And then he gave me, at some stage, I can't remember, I've got a good memory, K333, done a little even on Mozart. And I couldn't get the hang of Mozart. I just couldn't get the hang of Mozart. Just couldn't get the hang of it. And I can remember, you know, doing it quite a lot. And another rather devastating, when Gordon said, I think we'll leave it now. I think we'll leave it and go on to something else. And I remember feeling mortified, actually. And so it took me even longer to get the hang of Mozart, and I'm only just now beginning to get the hang of it. And anyway, that's...
But it reminds me of another thing. He didn't go in for kind of productivity, if you like, in terms of let's learn a huge number of pieces. He would just beaver away.
Yes.
And the most extreme example of that I can recall, in my experience, is very early on. He gave me the Bach D major toccata to learn.
Oh gosh, that's one of the things I forgot to mention. Yes, I did the E minor. Yeah, anyway, go on.
And I think we spent an entire term on it. And I played it every lesson. There may have been a few other bits of repertoire going on at the same time, but I'm pretty certain we spent an entire term perfecting that. And each time I think, well, it must be all right now. And you'd say, well, just hear that section again.
I can.
You know. But my goodness, I knew it by the end.
I can remember similar things. He did concentrate on particular pieces. I mean, I would never, in hindsight, what I can say, but I can't hold Gordon responsible in one sense, because I don't think I was a very curious student. So test race always something new every time. I just did as I was told.
Me
said,
too,
do this.
actually,
I wouldn't even look. My eyes wouldn't stray anywhere else. And I just concentrated on what I was given. So I was very conscientious in that way. But I do feel I left the academy at the age of 22, 73, with a minuscule repertoire. And it didn't prepare me for what was to come, what was to follow in the next few years. So I was learning on the trot as a result. Yeah. I don't know whether you found that.
Yes, I think, although in a way my career took a slightly different turn, so I found myself learning huge amounts of chamber music that I hadn't dealt with up till then.
And you weren't having to memorise.
Yeah, but it was a big lesson for me that with the Bach toccata, that you could just go on chipping away at something and you'd say, let's just try that passage again.
You mentioned that he would focus on certain pieces and perhaps gave you certain pieces for certain things. Do you remember any of those particular pieces that you found you learned an immense amount through with him?
Well, a big piece that I did in unbelievable detail with him was the Schumann Davidsbündler.
Yes,
which I did at my first Wigmore, actually. And we'd just do it over and over and over again.
I can remember that. I learned to love it. I used to love that piece.
Yeah.
I remember you playing it.
Well, he taught me to love it, I think, actually. Just popped into my head a word he used to use a lot. Do you remember? If I was saying it, I would say peremptory, and he used to say, it's peremptory. Peremptory.
Oh, yes.
Meaning kind of...
What do with a flourish?
Yeah, with a flourish and complete authority. You would play some phrase. Peremptory.
I can also remember him saying, at those big moments of a piece, and there are big moments, he said, dear boy, I want to hear the wood and the wire.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's a wonderful expression. The trouble is these days one hears too much.
Too much, yeah.
But there are moments
yes.
when we really is sort of longing to
Yes.
hear just the bare
Yes,
necessities, the
absolutely.
bare essentials.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was good at that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us some of the other quotes that he was famous for?
You've got a Patry one.
Oh, the Patry one, yes. Well, Gordon studied with Egon Patry in, where was it in Poland? I always remember, Zakopane. And this would have been, I would think, in the 1930s, early 30s.
Something.
And Egon Patry was a Dutch, in fact, I think. Quite what he was doing in Poland, I have no idea, but he taught there, and the young Gordon was in his class, and Gordon had been with, and I've forgotten, Frank Merrick at the Manchester School of Music, as it then was, and they went to Poland. Anyway, to cut a long story short, Egon Patry had a reputation for being a very fine pianist, fine musician, fine teacher. He wasn't in the front rank of the pianists of the day, but there are quite a few recordings of his still around, which have been transferred to modern CD and all that stuff. Anyway, he was always practicing, and he was doing concerts as well as teaching. And Gordon was fascinated by Egon's extraordinary facility, which was legendary. And Gordon just said, "Look, Maestro, have you got any tips on practicing?" And I always remember Gordon telling us what Egon Patry said, and he said, well, he thought a bit, I'd try and play everything, or practice everything, but I think play everything in as many ways possible. And the young Gordon was struck by it, and of course the older Gordon telling us was also struck by it, because it's all to do with the imagination in practicing. I think so many people tend to do things in a fixed way and don't explore all sorts of other ways, and then you find the way that works best for your whole sort of physique. And I think there's a lot of truth there. I think people tend to go at one thing and they get tight almost. Play with fat fingers, play with articulate fingers, just do it in every way possible.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's coming back to the thing we said some time ago. I think that's why he hung back from talking very much about the specifics of technique, because I think he was aware that what would work for one person
not for another.
Wouldn't for another, and he was willing to take this very long time for somebody to find their way. And that reminds me, once he said to me, he thought, his belief was that it took 9 years to make a concert pianist from the time they leave school and start full-time study. He thought 9 years, and he said, I'm interested in the first 3 and the last 3, and in the middle you can do what you like. And actually that's almost what happened to me, because I went off to Oxford for the middle 3 and then came back to him.
Well, perhaps he was modelling that remark on working with you.
I don't know. But I loved the idea, in the middle you can go and do what you like.
I can remember him saying, just to take, I think we mentioned this earlier, but this business of allowing people free rein, I think we haven't touched on this, when I said, when he used to say, well, no louder, dear boy, in other words, you're making a filthy racket. But he wouldn't say that. He felt just a light touch at the helm would put me on course and not feel self-conscious. Well, no louder. It's very good psychology, that.
Yes.
But he also, I remember him saying, not apropos of me specifically, but all of us, he would talk about teaching, and he said, one must, as a teacher, it's like having a child, you must, they've got to fall over, they've got to make mistakes, they've got to get misjudgments, and the talented ones will correct themselves. Words to that effect. In other words, he wasn't like so many teachers can be, and rather, you must do, should, ought, it's got to be this. He had a
On the other hand, one wouldn't want to give the impression that his standards were anything other than hugely high.
Oh, they were.
What he expected of himself as a teacher, and what he expected of us as performers. And he used to say this brilliant, but in a way slightly terrifying.
It was rather chilling. I think I know what's coming.
Your best must be so good that your second best will do. Which is, just psychologically, that is so brilliant, because it raises your standards to the limit, of what we must demand of ourselves. But it gives you permission not to be brilliant all the time, because you can't be. So in other words, it gives you permission to be human.
Yeah. Do you remember when he used to say, I've just thought of another one that we haven't talked about, he used to say in certain passages, or whatever one was practice, that you've got to be now a perfectionist in practice and a realist in performance.
Yes, I've forgotten that. Yes.
Which I think is another very good. In other words, aim to get it all there.
But accept what happens on the day.
Exactly, and I think that's, again, wonderful psychology, marvellous teaching.
What was his view on redistributing and, taking some notes in the other hand and cheating, basically?
He had a very broad view, and I was onto it even in those days a bit. I think you did a bit of that too, didn't you? Redistributing. And he was always fascinated, and he didn't mind. And I gave a talk actually in the museum at Chetham's 2 years ago, and I entitled the talk "To Cheat or Not to Cheat," which I thought was rather good. And I made the distinction, but this is Gordon. This was really Gordon, but I was trying to sort of distill in my mind Gordon's philosophy. And although it sounds verbose, I hope I kept this right, I tried to make the distinction between justifiable enablement and inappropriate facilitation.
Very good, yes.
And I think that's, like the beginning of Opus 111, ta-da! Part of that, part of the drama is the risk of that leap right at the beginning. But if you do ta-da, it just becomes fascinating. And so Gordon was, if it worked and sounded great, that was fine.
And it reminds, yes, I remember, I played in Poisson d'Or, and I did that set of pieces quite a lot with him. And I'd been having trouble with those terrible demi-semiquavers at the beginning. I practiced them every way I could think of.
Yes.
And a few ways I wished I hadn't thought of. It didn't seem to get any better, And I played it to him, and when I finished it, he said, "No, we'll just think about the beginning." He said, "Nobody's counting, as long as it sounds right." Which I thought, thank you.
It's been like let out of jail.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And in fact, the weird thing was, I recall that almost instantly I was able to play the right number of notes.
Yes.
Because I knew I didn't have to.
Yes.
Whereas forcing oneself to try and count these wretched demi-semiquavers.
I think there's an awful lot of truth in that. I think a lot of people's lives would be made much simpler if they could adopt that attitude.
Yes, you said it's the effect.
Yes. Well, I so agree.
Yeah. I wanted to hug him.
Yeah. Well, I've adopted that principle ever since.
Is there an analogy about a toolbox when it comes to practicing?
Oh, yes. Do you remember that?
Yeah, help me out with this one.
He used to talk about the craft of practicing. He saw it as a craft. And he said, when you're practicing, you've got to have a tool for every job you're doing. You're like a craftsman. You've got to have, those chisels like curve one to do the leaf, just get it right. All this. And it's this beautiful box, a velvet lined box, and all the tools just fit in, and they're beautifully oiled, and you put a thing over it and you close the box. And it's just a wonderful craft. The idea, I was very struck by that. And, you must have your tools. You're a craftsman. And I think this is a very powerful. And I use that analogy a lot, because I think most people just have a screwdriver and a hammer.
Yes.
They use mostly the hammer.
And a repeat button.
And a repeat button.
Yeah.
There was something else about practicing I wanted to say, but it slipped my mind.
How would he, when he was teaching you, how would he work at a piece? You'd play it through, and then what would happen? Or would you play it all the way through?
No.
Not necessarily.
Or he'd stop you. Let's talk about that.
Yes, it's in the pencil notes that I've still got, so often it says just in bar 33 to 55 again.
Yes, or discuss.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So he wouldn't be saying it must be so, but let's try it again and see if we can make it work.
Or a question mark.
Yes, absolutely. And there's always this kind of collaborative thing.
Yes.
He gave the impression on purpose, I'm sure, that even he didn't know what the correct solution to a particular passage was, and we would find it together, and that's what he meant by we go there together, but he's got more experience. You know.
Would he let you know when you got closer to it, or would it still be quite an open thing?
I think one would then leave it, but I'd probably play it to him the next week, and he'd say, just try that again.
I remember a very amusing thing, and I'm sure this happened to you. I can't remember specifically what piece it was, but I was playing something, and he just stopped me and he said, why are you doing that particular thing or in that particular way? And I said, well, Gordon, you did actually ask me to do it like that last week. And he twinkled and he said, well, dear boy, you stood still, but I moved on.
Yes.
He completely contradicted himself, so it should be like this.
Yes.
And I thought, even then, I mean, he roared with laughter, but I've always remembered that because that's what it's all about.
Yes.
You know, he and in a way, he was right. But I dutifully did what he said. But he thought differently the following week. It wasn't working. It was really a shot at it.
But last week's solution is no good for this week.
But he had the humility, just you know, because but I think there are many teachers who would never ever sort of want to go down that road of admitting that what they suggested doesn't work. They will try something. That was very much a philosophy of his teaching.
And a lot of what he said to me was about timing. You know, the when. I mean, he was wonderful on encouraging one to hear almost impossible to achieve sounds that he would then try to make on this wretched instrument. But time, very often he was talking about timing.
I can remember the word delay.
Yes.
He often used the word delay.
Yes.
Delay.
Yeah.
Yes, I just suddenly remember that.
And of course he had this
delay.
This sensational saying, which was a right note at the wrong time is a wrong note.
Yes, I'm still trying to work that one out. I do remember him saying something like that.
A right note at the wrong time is a wrong note. In other words, the primary thing amongst all these different elements is when.
Yes.
Which is extraordinary, really.
What was his repertoire? What was his main area of comfort when he played?
When he played?
Yes.
I don't think I know, actually.
I would say it was
very much to
broadly
himself.
fairly mainstream
Yes,
repertoire, probably,
Really.
really.
Sort
We didn't really do contemporary music, to be honest.
no.
But then, having said that, you know, he played the Warthorn, which in its day was contemporary. And then who wrote the Bagatelles for him? The 5 Bagatelles, that wasn't Warthorn. Or was that Fergus? It was Thomas Ferguson or something like that.
Sure. Yeah.
And then, of course, McCabe.
So McCabe was a pupil.
Yes.
Yes.
And
John,
he wrote some variations that I think you both studied with Gordon, right?
That's right. And John was with Gordon at Manchester. I think. Of course, John's just died, as we know. And but John's the only person I know, or knew, who heard Gordon play, and he can remember Gordon still performing when he was studying with him in about 1950, early 50s. And Gordon was still doing, your Liverpool days.
Yes. I mean, I imagine he did the big romantic concertos.
I think he did do the big romantic concertos, yes. But Gordon was very honest about his playing. He said, I think he admitted that he never felt comfortable that he'd started too late. And very early on, he was much more interested in teaching. But he's one of these great teachers who really had performed to a high level, if not so much. But he'd done the stuff.
Yeah. Was he a slight build?
Oh no, very big.
No,
build.
he was
very
big.
He was
big man.
A big man, and a big presence. And he filled the room. You can hear it.
Russian bear.
Yes,
he
was.
Used to wear a Russian.
Yes, he had a commanding presence.
If you could see him through the clouds of pipe smoke.
Yeah.
John, did you ever take chamber music to him?
No, and I hugely wish I had, actually. I came to that sort of later. Well, I suppose I was doing some when I was latterly with him, but I didn't take any of that to him, and it would have been fascinating, actually. Yeah, it's a regret, really.
Did you feel it?
No, and I didn't do much chamber music. I mean, no, I regret not so much not taking chamber music to him, so much as not doing any chamber music really at all of it to speak of, because I've come to believe that really is where you learn how to play, and certainly learn how to listen. And you didn't really, I can't honestly say he encouraged us to do chamber music.
No.
Really, to be honest.
No, I think not.
And that might be just something to bear in mind. He was very much interested in us being soloists and doing solo repertoire, I would say.
And yet, certainly for me, I think that this incredible mixture of, demanding high standards, always listening, knowing how to, or learning slowly how to practice, or if it's chamber music, rehearse. I mean, that stood me in fantastic stead. So, I mean, he prepared me for the stuff I did, even if he didn't hear me play the actual repertoire. And crucially, this always listening.
Did you ever talk about stamina? So if you were studying a big recital program with him,
He
or
used
a
to
big
refer, that's interesting, you should mention that. I can remember him talking about the life of a soloist as you've got it's like being a long distance runner. He used to liken it to.
Yes.
So in that sense, he was talking about stamina. I think he was aware of that.
Did he mean the idea of a career?
Yes.
Was
Yes.
I would say
as a
so.
long distance runner, or performance?
I think more of a career.
I think more of a career.
I remember him saying to me once, he said, to have a career you need uncommon talent, huge good luck, and the constitution of an ox.
Yes. He used to also say that you've got to have the hide of a rhinoceros and the heart of a poet.
Yeah,
You know, to deal with all the knocks and
Yes.
the bad reviews and all of that.
And the travelling.
And the travelling, yeah. He's dead right on all of that.
Did you ever take pieces back to him, after a few years' time? So maybe something that you'd learnt in your early years with him. Did you ever subsequently, perform them again and then bring the piece back to him?
I think I did. He coached me for some competitions because I did Leeds twice.
Yes.
In 75 and 78. And I certainly went to him for that. Definitely. And of course there was a 1974 competition that we were both in.
Yes.
And I was working with him then.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you were.
Yes.
So, and I left him officially in 1973, but kept and that was in 1974, wasn't it? We both drove up together.
Yeah, we
thanks.
went up to.
And then after that, I began to get concerto work. And I remember taking the Ireland Concerto to him in 1979. And, but of course he died in 1980. 1980. Was it 81? But so he was already getting ill. And I was standing, he asked me to stand in for him at the Royal Academy. Because he thought he was just a bit of chest trouble. And that he'd be back.
Where did he teach in the academy? Did he have one teaching room?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Room 41.
41.
Now renamed. The fireplace is taken out.
Oh, really? Oh, it's a tragedy.
The ceiling's been lowered, it's been, it's not as we recall.
How would your lessons work? Did you have one lesson a week and then a class with all of you in it, or how was it managed?
I recall a lesson a week and the class.
Yes.
Is that
Yes,
right?
yes. I'm not sure that it was the same every week actually, but you would have a bit of time on your own, and then was it on the Friday? So you did Thursday, Friday, didn't he?
And he always had it was William Friday because I can always remember him. He used to have to leave on the dot of 6.
Yes, to get his train.
Get his
back
train
to
back to Liverpool.
Liverpool.
And the afternoons they were long sessions.
They were.
And of course, one's got to bear in mind that he was my age then.
Yeah.
And yes, he would have been perhaps middle 60s, Irish.
Yeah, slightly
Middle
older.
to late
perhaps,
60s,
yeah.
perhaps slightly younger.
Probably my age now.
And doing that, and I can remember him getting a bit drowsy,
Yes.
and we all did.
Yeah.
I can remember you nodding off.
Yes.
And I can remember suppressed laughter too. What?
Sure, not when you were playing.
No, it was too loud. Far too loud.
Probably when I was playing myself, too quietly.
Well, it was a lovely, beautiful sounds, and it was sort of these nice, slow, beautiful sounds.
Was he different in the class to how he was in a one-to-one lesson?
Yeah, I don't think so.
I don't think so, no. I mean, when there was a bit more of an audience, he would expand rather, wouldn't he? But never in a way that says, listen to me. It was always just for the joy of being alive, really.
They were full of anecdotes. I mean, it was more, not just music we learnt about. You mentioned art and literature and all sorts of things he talked about. And people he'd known.
And politics.
Yes, he was hugely informed. It was an educational experience, aside from piano.
Yes.
Do you think the way he taught, and because he had so many successful students and so many advanced students, do you think his teaching is still impacting a generation now?
Well, the two answers. I don't want John. John wants to say something about that. I think we were both saying earlier today that there's not a day that passes, or not a lesson, I should say more accurately, or that I don't feel the presence of Gordon. That I feel so informed by him, really. And it's just, one's tried to, I think for myself, I've tried to take it forward.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps that's a rather arrogant thing to say, just keep it alive. That's what I can take.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not exactly a tradition, because that sounds like something that's fixed, but just an attitude to what music's for and what life can be, and actually how you treat people.
Absolutely.
Because in the end, I mean, there's all this stuff about the music, but actually he was interested in the person playing the music, which is proved by the fact that he let us all do it differently.
Yeah.
He was interested in not just the musical, but the whole development of a person. And the more I've taught, the more I've realised that's incredibly difficult to do, and it's so easy to cut corners and say, look, just don't play that so slow there. Look, then use that fingering here and do that here, and that's a quick answer to a long-term question. I find it so tempting to do the quick answer that'll get a result today, whereas Gordon, I didn't realise at the time.
It could be, John, that those quick answers are a result of Gordon's
maybe
detail, because I do feel now, because I'm actually just doing a bit of a revision, funny enough, and it's all so different to how it was all those years ago, and one does see, I think, quickly into this is the thing, and I've been doing all this for years. All I need to have done is third finger there, and it's a quick solution, but it's taken me 50 years to get there, 40 years to get there. So I wouldn't feel too bad about that.
Maybe not.
I think Gordon gave us the toolbox that we talked about a moment ago, the velvet lined toolbox. That I think that's his legacy.
Did he have a quote about making himself redundant as a teacher? Can you explain
I think I mentioned that earlier this afternoon. Yes, he used to say that his aim was to be redundant. I mean, it's a hugely modest thing to say, and I think he had no time. I mean, he was immensely discreet about his colleagues and friends. In fact, have you told that story? Yes, you did mention the mansion, but there's nobody in. But he was very discreet about his colleagues. But one did pick up, and I'm sure you did, John, the sense that he had no time actually for these sort of big name teachers who said, whose attitude is come to me and I'll get results for you. You come to me.
Absolutely.
Grooming. What are grooming? Which is not teaching. He didn't use that word, but I call it grooming. Which is easy peasy teaching. Louder there, softer there, so, and all this. And I know the person on the jury, they like this kind of playing. You know, all that. He absolutely, he had no time for that whatever. I think he felt it was quite immoral.
Yes.
He used to have funny stories about sort of performances he heard either from students or so many things come flooding back. Actually, one thing, I remember he said, of course, he heard Paderewski and all these legendary figures, and he said about Paderewski, he must have gone to hear Paderewski, of course, in Paderewski's second career after he'd been Prime Minister of Poland, this would have been, he would have heard him in the 1920s, when he was an old man, when Paderewski's sort of a bit stiff and awkward, you remember him talking about, and he said sometimes, the playing was, but you never came away from any one recital without there being one phrase or one movement or just a passage that you'd die for. It just redeemed the entire...
And you wouldn't mind about the rest of
it? Oh, no, it just cancelled it out, just to hear, which is sort of bears in with the hallmark of a great artist or something. But I remember him roaring with laughter. He heard, I think probably a student in some exam, the Berceuse of Chopin, which is of course got the D flat, da, dee, da, da. And they started on a B flat, and da, dee, da, da. And of course Gordon's examiner thought, well, that's an unfortunate thing, and then the B flat again. And he thought, well, obviously very, and it was B flat all the way through. Anyway, it's just a story. I think it was sort of one of those stories to comfort us if we'd gone a bit wrong. And I also remember him describing a performance of Gilels, who was doing, I think, the Tchaikovsky second concerto, the G major, which has a really scary, or it might even been the Schumann last movement, which terrifies every pianist. But the Tchaik 2 is like that. And he said it was an absolutely wonderful performance. It was just simply Gilels on the top form. And in the last movement, it came on step. He went shooting off into a wrong direction, which of course delighted all of us to hear this. We've probably just done that in the past.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And he said it really was, you were on the edge of your seat and the strings were trying to catch you. It back to a sort of turning pages again, all that sort. So it's so obvious. You sweat on Gilels, but gradually the sort of bits came together. And it all came together very well, and it sort of raced to the finish, and the audience went wild, And Gordon was saying that was part of it. That was part of the excitement, that heart-stopping moment. Yeah. But they survived it, and the rest, it was cancelled out. It was just a wonderful performance. Yeah. And I think that's so great.
Generous, really, in his view of others. I just remembered in the class, he'd been to hear Michelangelo. Do you remember this?
No, but you remember me.
He'd heard a Michelangelo recital, and we were all desperate to know what he thought of it. And he said, well, my dears, he said, I came away with a mental picture of a wonderful mansion. And I was seeing it from the outside, and there were pillars and fountains as you walked towards it, and beautiful gardens and wonderful rooms, beautiful furnishings, but nobody lived there. I've never forgotten it, and it was sort of devastating because he was so generous to everybody.
Yes.
But it really upset him, this kind of beyond perfection, and yet without...
That's a very striking image.
Absolutely devastating. And the more, if somebody always spoke unkindly about people, you wouldn't take any notice of that. No. But it was so...
That's very impressive, actually. I wish
nobody lived there.
I can't recall that, and I can't imagine that I wouldn't have recalled that. That's very, very powerful image. Yeah. That's going to shut me up for a bit, Alisdair, actually. That's a wonderful way of describing immaculate, faultless playing.
But. And he'd rather have a bit of crumbly plaster.
Exactly, yes. And a few migrants in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my house at the moment.
It's great to hear all the quotes, and I think one of the quotes that I think both of you probably mentioned to me at one time was, you do your best performance when you're at once removed.
Oh, yes.
Could you unpack that a bit and tell us what did he mean by that?
Do you remember? Well, I always remember him saying that in order to do your best playing, it's often when you're at one remove that you're watching the thing sort of unfold. It is as though, I can't remember you used this analogy quite, but it was as though you are a recording engineer in a glass box and you've got all the controls and you're having to just do a little bit there. Or was it a theatrical production when you, he said it is like a theatrical production, and you are the director, the producer, you're the lighting engineer, you're the prompt, as well as being the actor. You know, it was a very powerful image to me. And he said it's often that slight detachment, that slight watchfulness, that actually achieves the greatest results. I think he told us the story of somebody in the green room going to hear the great pianist. I don't know who it might have been. It might have been, well, one of the great pianists. Like, it wasn't Schnabel. It might have been somebody like it doesn't really matter. But they said, "Oh, what wonderful playing tonight! You really did. It was you. You know, it was you were in great form, and the music really came across. I mean, what was in your mind? What was in your mind when you were performing?" He said, "Well, I was just trying to remember. I've got to buy a cauliflower at the market for my wife."
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, yes.
Which it was a cauliflower. Do you remember that?
Cauliflower.
I'm sure it was a cauliflower.
Absolutely.
And
definitely was. Yeah.
which was terribly sort of. But I think there's a tremendous truth. In other words, what you were doing there and what you were actually thinking
completely different.
was completely different.
Yeah.
What did he do for John Ogdon? Did he teach John Ogdon for a while?
He didn't teach him. He coached him for the Tchaikovsky, wasn't it? I don't think he taught him in the conventional sense. No. But I think John Ogdon, even then, sort of knew Gordon as a great musician, a great teacher, and chose him to
just test stuff out.
Test the stuff.
Yeah, I remember Gordon. I remember him being very concerned about him.
Well,
particularly latterly, in saying he's overtaxing his memory, learning all this contemporary stuff and so on. But I remember also he asked John Ogdon once about his octave technique, which was phenomenal. And he reported John Ogdon as replying by saying, "I just feel as if I'm shaking them out of my sleeve," which is wonderful, isn't it? I remember going, great idea.
Well, don't you feel that?
Rarely. The thing he made me feel, trying to sort of encapsulate the thing, he made me want to play. Somehow.
Although he sort of reached us through the piano, through music, and through just the whole business of study. I was saying to John that he didn't trespass on his personal life, such as it must be, which is quite. I mean, I think as teachers, inevitably you're very aware of the students and their emotional well-being, because it's all so much part of it, And he didn't do that at all. But I was saying that I think he was deeply aware of each student's personality and their uncertainties and vulnerabilities and all the rest of it. And I was certainly going through a very difficult time for various reasons. Well, it's another thing. But I remember him once saying to me, perhaps when I was playing or having memory difficulties, or I think he was very tender, really, in a way. And I remember some years later when I was beginning to get work, I mean, quite big things, like, orchestral dates and things. And he said, he did confide in me then, when I was a little bit older, perhaps about 24. He said, "Yes, Philip, well, I'm delighted everything's going so well, and I did wonder about you. I never quite knew which way you were going to go." Always remember him saying that. Yeah. And I was touched by that, that he felt he could say it, and B, that he didn't say it at the time, if you see what I mean. It allowed me to just go on, and that bears out what John and I both say, that he just allowed the person to find their way. And it's just what you mentioned a moment ago, this wonderful idea of I go to where the student is, and then we go on together. I think that's a case in point.
Yeah, and I'm sure we both try to do that in our own teaching, but my goodness, it's difficult.
It is difficult. Yes, it is difficult.
Maybe he found it difficult too. I don't know.
No, but I think he's passed. I think he has passed that mantle on, and it's a very precious mantle.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And a very rare one.
Yeah.